Hello and welcome to the Novello podcast. Today we have Leah Boxell and I am very excited to have Leah on the show today. We have lots to speak about. I think the biggest challenge, Leah, is going to be fitting it into 30 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see what we can do. So just for our guests that don't know who you are, Leah, we're going to launch right into the experience that you had at NHSP for 3 years. Now, your job title was Director of Transformation, but actually during the pandemic, I think that role changed significantly and you became Silver Command. And I'm just going to read a couple of the bullet points from your LinkedIn profile around that time. And amidst the chaos, the project that you ran, Silver Command to Nicola McQueen, who was Gold Command at the time, was to mobilise 10,000 clinicians, fully trained in 21 days for the track and trace programme, to swiftly deploy 20,000 healthcare professionals for rapid response within 6 weeks, to rapidly staff the Nightingale Hospitals and meet urgent demands, and deliver 17,000 vetted vaccinators promptly for the National Vaccination Programme. I mean, that's pretty impressive, isn't it? There's some big stats. So, Leah, how did you find yourself in that position? Tell us about that time.
Yeah, so it was a crazy old time. And I suppose I'll probably start with a little bit of history. So I've spent 16 years in transformation. I always say 15, 16. I think I'm trying to hold on to the fact I'm not as old as I think I am, but it is 16 years in transformation. So I actually joined NHS Professionals as Chief of Staff to Nicola. So Nicola was only 6 months into her tenure as CEO when the pandemic hit. So that was a huge thing for her as the CEO as well, and obviously the team around her. But yeah, the pandemic had hit, and what Nicola had done prior to the pandemic was made sure that she was speaking to all of the right people, so that actually when the pandemic hit, we were front and centre of people coming to us to ask for us to help. And it was literally NHS England asking us to get as many people to the front line as quickly as possible. So we had that initial ask. In the NHS, what they do in crisis is they stand up the command structure, which is the bronze, silver and gold that you were talking about. So gold is always run at the CEO level. They're always the overall accountable person. But what you also have is you have the silver kind of lens, which is the bit that's tracking everything, that is monitoring all of the deliverables, making sure that everything's going to happen. And if it's not going to happen, how are we going to pivot? Making sure that the data is telling us that we are going to deliver on those initiatives and all of that sort of stuff. And generally communicating what we did, because we were asking so much of all of our internal employees, as well as the partners who were working with us at that time, to deliver, quite frankly, what was the unachievable. So we had to make sure that we were communicating with people regularly, and we were sharing the kind of lessons that we were learning as we were going along the way. And then bronze is where the actual work was done. So in that test and trace example, if you remember, that was our way out of lockdown. So it was the first bit of us coming out of lockdown, was that the test and trace would be in place. And we had a whole host of people doing the recruitment, getting people onboarded, putting people through the training and things like that. So it was a huge effort from the whole of the NHSP team, and something that I hope all of them will continue to be proud of, because it's something that I certainly am very proud of and will forever hold very close to my heart in what we were able to achieve in that time. But yeah, it took a lot of hard work, a lot of focus, and us being very, very driven to delivering results.
Yeah, it sounds incredible. It was a incredible time for everybody, wasn't it? We've all got our pandemic stories in terms of what was going on at that time. But I think the thing that strikes me about it, that I'd be interested to hear about, is that when you take on a project normally in a business, you know what the project is, you know what the deliverables are, you know what the expectations are, and you have a plan as to how to deliver it. But we all kind of sat down with our families at the end of March 2020, not knowing what the next week, month, year would look like. This wasn't something anybody had ever dealt with before. It was emotional. It was frightening for everybody, and so you took on this almighty role and responsibility without the normal things that you would have as part of a project management. How did you go about that?
Yeah, and I think to be honest, part of it comes back to we all had an opportunity to play our part in responding to the pandemic. And so we were all very proud to be able to do that. And that was across the entire leadership, but also the entire business and NHS professionals. Everybody stood up. I'm not going to sit and say it was a single, I was any more than anybody else. Everybody stood up to that. But I think you're right in running a project and having that portfolio lens, you do have it a little bit more structured, and things were coming in thick and fast. And I think it's, to be honest, one of it comes down to I thrive in that environment. I'm someone that probably steers towards chaos to be able to resolve it, because I love a challenge. So I found that, but also what it really helped me kind of unlock is we put a lot of red tape and blockers in our own way in projects as well. And actually we were given autonomy to do what we needed to do to be able to deliver, to help us get out of some of the lockdowns, to help get people to the front line. And that we still needed controls. We still needed some things in place because we needed to know we were going to be able to deliver. We couldn't put Nicola in the position where we weren't delivering against any of those initiatives. But it was about having the pragmatic lens and view on what it was that we were going to do to be able to make sure that we were getting to that point. So I think it's a little bit about mindset. But also about being able to kind of tailor your approach, and not one approach fits everything. And that's really why I've built Amidst, to go and take that out to other businesses, because I do think, especially in larger organisations, we tie ourselves up in knots, and actually it just stops it stops the ability to be able to deliver. And there are simpler ways to do these things, but still keep some of the control that you need around the financials, around the timeframes, and all of those sorts of bits and pieces.
Which is really relevant for what we talk about on this podcast in terms of the NHS. It's, one of the largest organisations to work with, isn't it?
Yep.
And I think it would be fair to say that there is an element of red tape, and there is some of those things that you've talked around and the inefficiencies. I think we see day in, day out when we work with the NHS, and for the people that work in the NHS, that when I listen to them, you can feel the frustration of, not always being able to get things done quickly. In the private world, and when you're running a business, we carry the responsibility of that business being able for the business to be sustainable, in the same way that we want the NHS to be sustainable. And you have to get things done very quickly, and you have to be able to make fast decisions and get things done, albeit taking everything into account and making good decisions. But we need to be able to get things done. And sometimes it can feel that isn't the case in the NHS. Now, do you think that is because it's such a large organisation? Is it a cultural issue?
Yeah, and I think I know everyone will kind of go, but in the Silver Command there was a pandemic, so you were able to probably do things quicker than you were able to do things in normal time. And I do get that to a degree, but actually there is this red tape and this bureaucracy that ties people up in knots. And I think that's where you find with some of the larger organisations is, smaller to medium-sized businesses get things done like that because they don't tie themselves up in that, and they try to stay in that thing. So it's not just because there was a burning platform in the pandemic. It is actually it's about a mindset and an approach and a culture. So I do think it is cultural, and I think it's hard, isn't it? Because I think it is a big, mighty workforce, and how do you get them all aligned to being able to do that? But I do think a lot of it comes down to autonomy, because if you go and speak to the local trusts, it's not that they don't want to do these things. It's not that they don't want to solve some of these challenges and have the workforce that they need. They want to do it, but it's about them being able to do what they need to do, and it's going to need some thinking in different ways. My favourite saying is, if you do nothing different, nothing changes. And I think that's the problem, is that we're stuck in this system where actually sometimes they're not able to change. So I think it's wider than at a local level. I think it's outside of that, and actually we need some creative thinking coming into it. We know that the NHS works with external sources and all of those things to help these things, but they've been the same external sources that have been supporting them for years and years and years. So I think it's time to bring in some fresh thinking and try and look at things a little bit differently.
And it was interesting to hear you say that during a crisis, actually they were able to allow people to have autonomy to get things done because we were in a crisis. do you think, does it feel as though it's kind of gone back to the same old now, and that what we learned from the pandemic in terms of acting in that crisis, giving people autonomy, being able to get things done, has that carried forward at all, do you think?
No, I think it's gone back, and I can only go on the conversations I have. Obviously, I'm not working at NHS Professionals anymore,
Yeah.
so I'm not close to the helm of it. But I speak to the hospital trusts, and I've got some contacts, and they are frustrated. They don't have the autonomy. They're not able to respond and do things differently. And yeah, I think there's a sense of frustration, because actually nobody comes to work to not be able to do a good job. You want to be able to do a good job and do things and improve it. And there's so much bad press about it. You know, it's a talking point, and it has been for a long time. And I really feel for the people that give their all to the job they do, and they're just not able. They're not given the right autonomy to be able to do it. So yeah, I'm a big believer. It needs some different thinking, and people to have the permission to be able to go out and try things. And actually, sometimes those things won't go well and they won't work. But actually, you know, fail fast, learn quickly, and then try something else. And I think there's a bit of a fear in that area, to be able to do something or try something that might not work.
Yeah, and I agree. I was at the HCSA conference last week in Telford, or maybe the week before now, and a room full of hundreds of people, so passionate for the NHS. You know, I really felt quite emotional, because sometimes you can forget all the good things that happen and become frustrated with some of the process and some of the inefficiencies. And I was sat in this room, and it was just full of wonderful people wanting the NHS to work and to be better and focused on good patient outcomes. And, you know, I sat in there and thought, how can the NHS fail, you know, with this goodwill, with these incredible people? But I think it is made difficult. I think they would all have a story as to why perhaps what they want to deliver is made more difficult, and not given that autonomy, maybe. So yeah, interesting. And the work that you do with Mobilised, Leah, you know, really speaks to this, doesn't it?
It does.
What are your intentions with it? Is it NHS focused? Are you looking to do work in the NHS and help some of these things?
Yeah, so it's one of the areas that we want to work with, but actually we want to go and help other businesses as well and other sectors, just learn from this. I think we tie ourselves up in knots. But just before I go into that, I've just got one more thing I wanted to say on the NHS. I do think it's autonomy, but I also think it's given people a voice. So I think what we did in the pandemic, if you remember, is we asked anybody and everybody to come forward with any ideas as to how we could resolve some of these things. And I'm a big believer in change, that you should do that entirely anyway. You always speak to the people on the front line, the people that feel the pain points. They're the people that know. And I just wonder how many of those people are given a voice and given a chance to be able to resolve some of these issues or come up with ideas in these issues in some of the NHS areas that they're trying to work on. Because as you say, I meet passionate people all of the time that want to make a difference, and they absolutely have the ideas and things like that. But actually, how do you enable those ideas to be able to come out and be shared, and then be able to work through to see whether that's an option? And that's, you know, one of the things that NHS Professionals did. We asked everybody what type of things we could do to resolve things, and they continue to create that behaviour. Nicola's very good at that, in that she does get the insight from her team. But that's one of the things I take out to the companies I work with, is if you're going through a change or you've got a project, speak to the people that feel the pain and what it is that you're trying to resolve. Get it from them, what works, what doesn't work, and make sure that they're a part of it, so that you can then understand what it is you need to do. And it will be those people that will know what's not going to work. It'll be those people that will spot what's going to go wrong in a project, and especially the naysayers that are in a project that don't necessarily buy in or believe to what it is that you're going to do. They'll be the people that will tell you where the project is going to fall down, and you want them as part of the work that you're doing to try and make fundamental change.
Yeah, I love that, and absolutely. And I think we've got thousands of those people, haven't we, that just want that voice. And great to hear that it was successful during the pandemic response. I mean, you clearly learned so much from that time.
Yeah, so much.
Yeah, it's so important that that's not wasted.
Yeah,
you know,
and that's why I want to take that out to other industries. You know, there's a lot of businesses out there that that just don't really know how to do this, or think that they're stuck in a particular way of doing these things. And, project costs spiral, timelines drag on, scope changes. The amount of times I've had a conversation that said we thought we were going and doing this project, but actually it grew arms and legs and it's now turned into this massive beast of a project. We don't know how to get it under control. There are approaches that will address and keep you on that. But I'm a firm believer it's about having the insight to make informed decisions. And that's what I did through the Silver Command, and that's what I take out to businesses now, is having a pragmatic approach but that drives insight to make informed decisions. So if something is going to go wrong, that you're able to make those decisions and agree on whether it's going to be something you continue to do. So I talk a lot about non-negotiables. So when you're going into a project, what are the non-negotiables that you have to achieve? So the 10,000 test and trace clinicians, like that was a non-negotiable. We had to have those people for that day. And then you work back from that. So when things happen and the curveballs come in, or something changes along the line, or the budget starts to creep out of what you've planned, you can then have that conversation to go, but is that still going to deliver the non-negotiables, or are we compromising those? And then you can make informed decisions actually whether you stop a project. I think there aren't enough projects stopped where actually you've kind of gone double over the budget, and actually you kind of go, well, we're going to keep going because we've already spent double over the budget, so we've kind of invested now. But you then go and contribute the budget and you don't get to the outcome, and you haven't delivered against those non-negotiables. Actually, you could have halved the cost that you had wasted if you stopped at the right point. So I think it's about having those things in your mind, and those are the approaches that we take out as an Mobilised, and it's very scalable in terms of what it is that you can apply, but it is about making those informed decisions based on insight, and that's the bit that is really, really important.
That budget management is crucial, isn't it? There's so many projects that do run over budget, and at what point would you say in a project, is it time to have that conversation around, do we stop the project? Do you stop the project completely, or do you continue it at a lower cost?
So it could come at any point. I think it's about being on top of your costs. So from the very start, you should be able to be forecasting what you think it is. So even when you don't really know in your scoping, you would still have a plan for a budget around discovery. So you should be able to say, right, okay, we think it's this much for us to be able to scope out this project. Then I would recommend you come back with a business case once you've done your discovery to say, okay, this is what we think it is to deliver the project. But you should be constantly reviewing that and coming back. And at any point you think that's compromised, I think you need to understand what is the non-negotiable, what is the outcome you're trying to get to. Does it still warrant that you've gone over your budget? Are you still going to get your return on investment or not? And I think you have that at any point you feel like those costs are going to go out. So I think forecasting of costs is so important, so that you're understanding whether those budgets are going to be blown, not just looking at the costs month on month as they happen. I think you need to be forecasting so that you can see where you think you're going to be going.
And I know there's a lot of different types of project management. We can talk agile or lean.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with lots of different ones, or do you have a favourite?
Yeah, no, I don't have a favourite. I think they all work in different guises, and I think it's about picking the best parts of all of them, and that's what we help our clients to do. So there are elements to all of those, and we were doing daily stand-up calls and things like that in the Silver Command, because that's what we needed to do. We were operating and running at such a pace and things like that. So that kind of drumbeat of that kind of daily stand-up and check in with the team around the activity, that's an agile aspect that we were doing. But we take and pick and choose the bits and pieces, I think, that are the most relevant. I think that's the part and the art to project management, is to be able to choose those bits and make sure that it's appropriate without putting in too many layers. I mean, when you're delivering 10,000 clinicians in 21 days, you probably do need to be speaking daily. Whereas if you're delivering something on a much smaller scale, you probably wouldn't need that approach. So it is about very much tailoring what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's fabulous advice. And with the NHS, one thing that I was really intrigued at the conference that I was at a couple of weeks ago, but I've seen it time and time again, really, is that within the NHS, they're given, within local authorities, they can make their own decisions. There's a lot of differences in how each trust runs. Some similarities, but there's a lot of differences too in how they're run. We see it even from a staffing perspective that the compliance in one trust will be different to the compliance in another trust.
Yeah.
The processes will be different, who we work with will be different. And that sometimes can feel as though it causes some inefficiencies. And when I was at the conference, there was a fabulous session with a lady who works with NHS Trust to provide efficiencies through bots. So they'll go in, build a bot to run off a particular part of the process that is inefficient, and provided a great case study of an NHS Trust that had saved the equivalent of, it was something like 5 FTEs. They'd also delivered additional value on top of that to the end user for this bot, being the patient, and they could show all these great outcomes. And I went and I met her afterwards and I said, if you've shown that this is working wonderfully well in this trust, why have NHS England, why have you not spoke to somebody within NHS England that can go, this has worked great, let's roll this out now to the other 200 trusts? That doesn't seem to happen. I don't understand.
Yeah, and I think this is the bit of what is the strategy as a whole, and how do you get that alignment? Because obviously there will be some needs for different trusts to work in a slightly different way, and you've got to give them a bit of flexibility where needed. But I think you're completely right. If there are ways and means to create efficiencies that would benefit all, how do you make that an option to all of them? I think there will be a bit that you'll have to work through, which is trust and proving that. And I think we get that with a lot of AI and automation is, do people trust it? And I think that's going to be the change adoption piece that you're going to have with anybody. That's not just the NHS. The change adoption piece of workforce and the people that do those jobs for us today, trusting the automation is going to be as good as what they can do. And I think you're going to have to get through that change adoption side of things, but that's just by proving it. So doing it at a smaller scale, doing MVPs, then rolling it out to a bigger scale, and just constantly proving and having your proof point. But yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? Because they do work a bit more in silos in the hospital trusts, and maybe that's one of the things that Wes needs to be looking at is actually how do you bring a bit more uniformity between the trusts so that actually they can jump on the bandwagon of efficiencies and successes that other hospital trusts are having. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that they should be considering.
Yeah, because it comes back to the inefficiencies, doesn't it? That look, I'm not clinical, so I can't speak. A clinician would speak far better about this than I would, and would understand why there is a need for doing things in silo. Because I know that there will be for some
there
things,
absolutely will be, yeah.
Because the demographic is different for each trust, and so you've got to take that demographic into account to be able to provide the good patient outcomes, and we want to be able to do that. But there are surely some processes that, much like any business, just sit across the entire business. I'm going to talk about the NHS as if it's a business here, because it is, in a sense. And there's some things that I think can sit across all of that, and to be able to, I mean, where would you start? If, let's say, we were to bring Enablis in and have a look at, okay, where can we do, where can we make things efficient across the whole board, and where actually does there need to be these things working in silo?
Yeah,
that would be one hell of a project, wouldn't it?
Oh, that would be, probably the biggest project. But something that, I mean, well, the way I would start that is you need to define what the end-to-end user journeys are. And I always talk about that, and I will continue to do. So what do you want those end-to-end user journeys to be for the patients, for your staff, for your stakeholders? And I think once you've understood that, then you can then start to work out. And I agree, there will always be a need to do something slightly differently within an NHS, because you say you've got different demographics and you've got other things that go on. But some of those core processes, if you can focus on an end-to-end process and really define what that is and how you want that user experience to be, then you can create some efficiencies, and because you get really laser focused on what it is that you're trying to drive as an outcome. And I think, you tentatively said you're going to call it as a business. Patients are customers. We are the customers of the NHS as patients, and I think when you start to think about it from a customer lens, and actually that it's not just the patient, it is a customer. Actually, what do you want their experience to be? Like long wait times and all of the things that we hear about at the moment that the trusts are grappling with. Actually, how do you start to improve some of that thing and some communication? And I think if you look at it from that lens, you can certainly drive some of those things. And I know that everybody within the NHS is trying their very best at the moment, but there is something, I think, at the core where they need to be helped to be able to kind of map out some of this stuff, to be able to think, to be able to try and resolve it, and to be able to try and find a different way of working. And as I say, go back to my saying, if you don't change anything, nothing different happens. So the outcome is still the same. And we've, even before the pandemic, we were talking about bed shortages, and my hospital will sometimes go on red alert and things like that. That it was a problem before the pandemic. The pandemic just heightened it even more so. So it's how do we resolve some of that?
Yeah, agreed. And this podcast was the sole purpose of this podcast was to give people a voice. You talked before about us being able to give people a voice, and that's something that worked really well during that time in the pandemic, and something that NHSP have done well. And that's what this podcast is for. I would love to think that eventually, perhaps even Mr. West Streeting may give it a listen, and listen to voices that are out there that are, good people working in good businesses or within the NHS that, can provide ideas and add value, and there's that many people with goodwill that if we give them a voice and allow them to do a job, that we can get the NHS to where it needs to be. And I firmly believe that. I have spoken to the odd person who I think's kind of feeling worried for the NHS and the future of the NHS. Call me an optimist, but I'm still a firm believer that the NHS can thrive and do what it needs to do in the face of all the challenges that we have.
Yeah, and I think let's be fair. I fundamentally disagree with the statements of the NHS is broken. By the way, I don't think that is, and I think that's quite an outrageous statement to make. I think by nature we focus on the negatives. There are millions of positive things that happen every single day in NHS trusts, and we don't remember those when we're talking about these things. Yes, there are some big issues to resolve: the workforce, the wait times, some of those things that are really hurting the people that are working within those trusts and the job that they want to do. But there are incredible things being done, and I think we need to, for that workforce more than anything, we need to also remember that. And I think that's why when people make the kind of bold statements of the NHS is broken, that I don't think that's fair to say, because actually there are a hell of a lot of positive things that just go on and are unsung about, because actually by nature we focus on negatives as well. So I would kind of caveat it with that as well.
Yeah, I love that. I completely agree. And I think, yes, for the things that perhaps could work better, there's thousands of people that are doing a fabulous job every day.
Yeah, and in every business there's things that could work better. It's just that this is at such a large scale and impacts so many people, so that's why it's such a talking point. There are things that all of us in business could do better. But yeah, I think let's recognise some of the great stuff that's happening as well, and some of the amazing developments.
I love that you've challenged that statement that's quite often said around the NHS is broken. You're right, it's not broken, it still works. It's just not as efficient as perhaps it could be, and there's work to be done. But may I suggest that it's perhaps, you talked before about you were allowed to get on with things and do things because we were in crisis, because it was a pandemic. It's all relative, isn't it? But I think there would be an argument to say that we're slightly in crisis now.
Yeah, and I think it would be debatable, and there would certainly be pockets of the trusts that are in crisis. So I think you potentially could be. I think I agree. I think it actually comes back to risk tolerance more than anything. And I think that was the thing. The risk was far outweighed by the fact that we had people literally dying through the pandemic. And so actually the tolerance became so much higher because actually we had to take action, we had to do something. And I think that risk tolerance is something that should be looked at now sensibly, because obviously the people's lives are at risk in these sort of things. So you need to do that in the right places, but there will be things where you know we're all too risk adverse with things, and actually if you looked at it a slightly different way and you took a bit of an opportunity around a risk, it could pay off and it could do things without impacting life and all of those sorts of things. So I do think it comes back to risk tolerance.
Yeah, and I think, you know, on that note, it's one hell of a job to ask of somebody, isn't it, to put themselves in the position where they are making these decisions that, as you say, this is patients' lives. And that's one hell of a responsibility. And I have nothing for respect for the people like Mr. Wes Streeting and all the NHS Trust CEOs and everybody in those leadership roles, because they're taking on a level of responsibility with, let's be honest, you know, the negative media, the comments that you read, you know, as you've talked about, they never get the good press. They never get the thanks or the praise if a good job is done. And, you know, I have nothing but respect for them. These conversations are really only to say, well, how can we do it even better? You know, even the good stuff, how can we do it even better? And to give people a voice and for people to, you know, be able to listen to the various experiences like those that you have. Is there any, do you see any opportunity? I mean, obviously your background very much workforce. We've not even had time to touch on the long-term workforce plan because that's, you know, hours of discussion in itself, isn't it? But I mean, it's a project, isn't it? You know, that's your area of expertise. What do you think about it? Is it a project that's deliverable?
So I think it is, but I think it's that mindset and unlocking some of the red tape and the bureaucracy. And I think, you know, I witnessed an exercise actually that was fabulous, where they had 10 people line up in a line, one behind each other, and they asked them to pass a ball from the back of the queue to the front of the queue. And so they did it. So they passed it through, and it had to go through each person. And I think it took them like 2 seconds or something like that. And the person now said to them, right, okay, you've now got to do that in half a second. And they kind of looked at each other and went, well, that's not possible. That's not possible. And they then figured out, actually, if they threw it from the back to the front, that would take the half a second and it would still go through all of the people. And I think that's some of the thinking that we need to bring in, is how can you do things differently? And to be honest, you know, that's where Nicola and the team really strived in the pandemic. It was that different thinking. How can we do things differently? How can we respond? How can we think of something in a different way? And I think that's the thing. It's got to be constantly, is there a better way? Is there an easier way? Is there something else we can do? And I think that, along with getting far more pragmatic around the governance and the approaches to delivering projects, making sure that it's real insight-led informed decision-making process, rather than tying yourself up in knots of different boards and different groups that have to approve everything. But using the pragmatic approach and using it sensibly. So if you've got something that's quite critical that potentially has an impact to how somebody's care may be, and actually what a patient care might be down the line that could impact their life, you would put far more around that than what you would if you were just going to open a new office or something like that in a hospital trust. And I think it's about that very pragmatic approach. But I'd say they would be the two key things. And maybe bring some new people in to work with the NHS trusts, some different thinking and some hands-on experience. I think there's a lot of strategic thinking that goes on around the NHS, but actually go and get people that will go and find out from the front line what's going on, what are the pain points, and people that will really drive that through from a delivery perspective. So I think, you know, it is deliverable, but it needs some different ways of doing things.
Yeah, and innovation is so important, isn't it? I mean, I work in the world of technology now as well, as you know, and it's so exciting, you know, to find new ways to do things. And they want to make this move from analog to digital, and with that comes innovation. And I hope that we see much more of that. And that's why I was so excited the other week to see this lady with the bots and making efficiencies, because I thought, yeah, that's made a real difference for that trust. You know, and it's one example of somebody who didn't work in the NHS. She just wanted to work with them and provide these efficiencies. And, you know, it was just great to see. So So I knew we would struggle to keep to 30 minutes, Leah, and I could talk to you today. But I always finish by asking if you were Prime Minister for the day, and today your day was scheduled for healthcare, what would you do?
I would be going out and speaking to a whole array of people, from nurses through to matrons, through to the leadership at hospital trusts, and asking them how they could do what they do differently. Maybe take the ball exercise out, to get the kind of juices flowing. But yeah, I would be asking them what's a different way to do things, and keep asking that, because I think the answers are probably out there in that workforce. And then I would be looking to make sure that we've got a clear path to be able to actually deliver things. So unlock some of the red tape.
Yeah, I think you would be a very popular Prime Minister. I think people would vote for you. And yeah, I think it needs to be done. And if we can do a little bit of that with this podcast, and invite people in from throughout the NHS to get a voice out there, then, that's what we're aiming to do. But thank you very much for today, Leah. I know you're very busy, and the team at Mobilised are very busy helping the world be more efficient.
Yeah.
So I'll let you get on with your day, but thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.